name's Simon Cushman. I work as a freelance strength and conditioning coach alongside a lecturing job at Reseath College as well. I work with individuals, team sports athletes across a wide range of sports as well. Generally working on physical development, working towards competition, but also on the general population side as well. I work with just individuals that are looking to get a little bit fitter, a little bit healthier, just develop their movement skills, their movement patterns, and improve their quality of life at the end of the day.
What actually is strength and conditioning, and how is it defined?
So strength and conditioning is in general is looking at development of human performance. So it is very much a physical side of things, where I would look at developing things like the biomechanics of someone's movement patterns, or it could be the physiology of their different systems that might be working at any different time. Often it's kind of thought of and got a bit of a bad reputation to be just lifting weights and focusing on kind of strength development or getting really ultra fit for marathons and things like that. But it is everything from being able to prevent injury. It could be improve your body position. It could be when riding. It might just be the mobility around the hips to be able to actually produce a good quality movement, as well as all the other aspects. So looking at everything that goes into every component that might go into actual competition, and trying to break that down to come up with training plans that could be beneficial to actual performance. So it's all about working with the athlete, with the coaches, to try and monitor and maintain the key aspects that will make the best performance possible.
So what are the key benefits of strength and conditioning whilst off the horse to help with training on the horse?
The main thing that I tend to focus on is just a general healthy body. The one thing that I have previously got really caught up with as a strength and conditioning coach is trying to directly influence performance too much. Some of the things that I do in maybe the weights room or with training sessions, I know might not have a direct impact on horseback, but a lot of the things that I would do is keep and maintain a really healthy body. So the more that riders can ride and be on horseback and be without injury, and be able to move in really good quality positions and movements, the better their learning and their communication with their horse will be. So managing injury potential is a massive part that I normally start with. So try and get riders out of their normal movement pattern they would do on horseback, and try and get them to move the way the body is meant to move. So in all different movements, all different directions, all different movement patterns, so that when they are riding, they are far more efficient. Once they've got that general foundation, that little base, then start to build on things like strength. So a little bit of strength will help build up some resilience to injury. It will help their movement efficiency, and then things like coordination, which are massive in dressage, and improve those things, not just from being able to stand on one leg and catch a ball, kind of things that you might have seen as a strength and conditioning coach, but from a physiological level as well, the actual firing patterns of the different muscle fibers within the muscle belly. That will be huge towards all the fine and gross movement skills that you might be doing on horseback. So all of those things, the coordination, the strength, the efficiency around horse, even though you might not be using a specific movement that is similar to horseback, all of those things kind of feed in towards that horseback performance.
It's also interesting because for experienced riders that might think they know all about it, there's actually still so much to learn.
Absolutely, and I think that there's still so much to learn from the industry and from strength conditioning as well. We only know like a really small amount of the key things that will affect performance. There's a lot of research that's going on at the moment looking at the biomechanics of riding and different aspects that prevent injury. Hartpury College are doing quite a bit of research there. We're trying to do a little bit at Reseath just to develop the understanding, because it's not there in as much detail as it's needed.
How important is core and back strength dressage?
It's definitely important. It's a really big part of riding. I think it's characterized very much by, can I get away with my current core and back strength? Whereas it might be worth thinking about, can I have the strongest core and back to allow me to move freely and efficiently and still have strength with suppleness and all those different things. And then it depends, I suppose, how you term strength in particular. Is it really, really strong and being able to move a really large amount or create a really large force? Or is it the effect? Is it in fact being able to repeatedly produce a controlled movement? Both of those relate into strength, and the stronger your back is, the less energy you'll use for some of the repetitive movements, so your efficiency will increase. But it will depend how, I suppose, some of your tactics as well, and how you choose to ride and how your horse carries you as well. If you've got a particularly strong horse, you might need to have a stronger back. Whereas if you have a slightly more bouncy horse, it might be a different aspect that you need to look at. However, one of the massive features that I have certainly seen that differentiates standard and quality of riding is core strength. And by core, I'm kind of talking from everywhere from the bottom of the rib cage all the way down to the top of the thighs, so that interaction with the hips as well. The strength of that will be a huge component as to how people can ride efficiently time and time again, and whether that be they have managed to train it through Pilates and yoga, strength conditioning, or if they are naturally able to do that. And there are some riders that when they ride, they naturally engage everything, which is fantastic, and they develop that while riding, which is fantastic for them. But that aspect is massive, and it is huge, especially posturally, to hold themselves in a comfortable position without looking too forced and too rigid and like they're really trying too hard. It's trying to certainly give the impression that it is particularly easy. And the more efficient you can be, the stronger you can be, the better that is as well. And there's a little bit on some of the blog stuff that I've written with regards to some aspects of core training, from hips, abdominals, all of the core muscles that deal with all the different movements, as well as some postural exercises for upper, middle and lower back as well.
If you had a horse that wasn't so strong, do you think people would kind of be able to just think, oh, I can get away with not having so much core strength?
Yeah, I think that's a common thing. If they don't feel like they're being pulled out of position, or they've not got any cues in their head or from coaches saying, oh, you're not quite straight, or your alignment's off, or you're slightly asymmetrical one side or another, if they've not got that reinforcement, they won't think that they need to develop it. Whereas even the smallest asymmetry, so if they're slightly out of saddle one way or another, it could have that effect on the horse as well, and bring up asymmetries within their stride, within their gait patterns. So there's a massive aspect, even if it doesn't look aesthetically like there is a deficiency, or they don't feel like they're being pulled or turned. The stronger the core can be, as long as that flexibility and mobility is still there, the better. There's not necessarily a threshold highest amount that if your core is stronger than this, it doesn't matter. It is important through day to day as well as riding.
I think that leads us nicely into the next question then. How can I tell if I'm improving in my strength and conditioning?
So one of the key things that I use is a profiling battery of tests. So if I'm working with academy athletes face-to-face or riders face-to-face, there'll be a number of tests that I can do and I can perform, and I can watch them perform and look at their movement patterns, look at their scores as well. So there'll be some scores that they will do a certain amount of reps or hold for a certain amount of time. And then when they get tested on their next camp or next session, I'll be able to see if there's any improvement in those specific scores. And normally their program will relate to those specific tests. So it might highlight an area of weakness and say, right, well, your hamstrings and glutes need a little bit more development. This is your program. We're going to retest in 8 weeks' time. And hopefully there will be that change and that improvement. So that's one of the ways that I generally use. If it's online training, it's a lot more movement-based exercises that I can actually watch and observe, or they can send me videos that again, I can just watch, observe, and have a look at the positions they're holding in or duration of time they might be holding something in. One of the big ways, if you don't have access to that or you're not sure how to test things, will just be, how am I feeling? How am I moving? One of the massive things is, do I wake up with a stiff and sore back? Can I roll out of bed straight up into day-to-day activity? When I get on my horse, do I feel a little bit stiff? When I get off the horse, half an hour later, when I start to cool down, do I get cramp in my lower back? Those sorts of things kind of relate to that first aspect of general day-to-day health. And it's absolutely massive for that. So how do I feel within myself? Then how do I feel when I'm riding? So is there any feedback from the coach that you have had that is positive on the areas that you've been working on? So it could be the angle at the knee, the position of the heel, the position of the knee in relation to the saddle. Are some of those things better, worse? How have they changed? Any asymmetries? Do you turn more comfortably? So those little aspects are important to note and be really mindful of. But at the start of your program, your strength and conditioning program or sessions or whatever it might be, it's really important to set some goals. So that's the biggest thing that I try to, if not involve the client with or the rider with, it will be to make sure there are some goals of a program, whether that be from the tests, whether it be to say, right, this is a deficiency, this is what we need to work on, or whether it be an individual saying, well, I feel like I need to work on this aspect of physical performance. And it'll be exactly the same with coaches as well. If there's a technique that you need to master, you'll be set little goals, and it's exactly the same with the physical and fitness side of things. If you feel you need to develop your core strength, being a massive part, how do I know if it has changed? What can I measure? What can I manage? So it might be a simple equipment-free test like a plank. Hold that plank. How long is that being held for? Hold it again 8 weeks later. Has it improved at all? Has the time improved? Has the position improved? All of those little aspects are really good to improve. But a lot of the time it is just, how am I feeling? Is there a difference? And if tests are available, and what I can do is do a few videos, some of the main tests that I use for some of the functionality around the hips and the core, and I can send them over as a way of monitoring, testing specific key aspects that I've found can differentiate performance.
It's really interesting, because I think a lot of people tend to not look back and see how far they've come with like maybe 8 weeks. So writing that goal down. I
think the coaches do it really well.
Yeah.
And I think the athletes respond to that really well in how they work with their coaches, and they have a goal for that aspect, the horse aspect, and they'll relate to it and they'll know exactly what goes on. And maybe they don't relate to that physical side, the training side off horse, so they don't seem to respond as well.
How do I know if my technique is correct whilst training?
So technique wise, it's quite important to make sure that you are maintaining good quality technique, partly for injury prevention, partly for the actual effectiveness of the exercise as well. a lot of the ways is just simply videoing yourself and comparing it to either something on YouTube or some of the resources that are on the website, on some of the blog articles. Both really, really good ways to actually compare technique and have your session on one side, the gold standard or the exercise you're trying to replicate on the other side, and comparing the two. And are there any differences? Being able to notice if you're performing a squat, for example, are your knees in the correct position in relation to your toes? Looking at those little things. The other thing that I offer is people send me videos of their exercise technique, what they're currently doing, what they're looking at, just to give them little pointers, because it is a massive part, and there is potential for injury if you're reinforcing the wrong technique over and over again. So it is important to get that technique correct straight away, and there is a bit of self-reflection in there where you'll look at yourself and compare that, but that's what coaches are for as well.
So what age should young riders consider strength and conditioning alongside their day-to-day work?
So I would say that there's no age to start. It's not necessarily something where you hit 16, which seems to be a common age that is given in certainly the personal training industry, that people under the age of 16 cannot train in gyms, which is more for insurance purpose. There's no start date to being able to exercise or perform strength and conditioning. And I think strength and conditioning is, as it is thought of as a strengthening kind of discipline to work on, it's not really that simplistic. There's so many different movement patterns and things that kids and children from even a really young age will be performing that would be part of my strength and conditioning sessions. So from a very young, a youth age, things like running, moving in different directions, climbing, crawling, throwing, kicking, those are all aspects that are key to sports performance and also key to strength conditioning. That is how the body moves. It is the different movement patterns. If they are running and jumping, they're going to be developing their muscular strength, their endurance. So all aspects of what kids do on a day-to-day basis, be it at school, at home, in the park, all of those things, if they are being encouraged to do that and move out of a disciplined pattern, that is strength conditioning encompassed kind of in that sort of thing. And I think that is what gets lost as people get a little bit older. And one of the best sessions I seem to run with adults, so a big group of adults doing a game that I would normally do for kids. They will be moving. It might be something as simple as two teams, there's a load of balls in the middle, and whoever gets the most balls back to their zone wins. Something really competitive, really simple, but they're running, they're moving, they're changing the height that they're moving at, they're picking things up, developing coordination, all of those things. And the adults love it more than the kids, I will probably say.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that sounds really fun. Yeah, I can imagine, especially with people being competitive as well. I bet it gets funny.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it worse. The competitive edge that the adults will have seems to be far more than the kids.
That's brilliant. So is there such thing as being too young to considering growth and development?
So I think one of the biggest things, I suppose, again, with the myth of strength conditioning, and there's a myth around training and certainly resistance training with kids or youth athletes and stunting growth, which is a myth, and there's enough research now to support that there are no injuries actually maintained from resistance training. The injuries are more from children training and dropping weights on themselves, so little trips, little traps. Those are the injuries that come out of it. There could be things like overuse injury. So if they are doing a lot on horseback or a lot at school, and then all of a sudden they get thrown a lot of strength and conditioning as well, then that could be a mismanagement of training load. So they are trying to do more than their bodies can cope with. However, if that is managed, and hopefully a strength and conditioning coach would be able to do that and understand the differences that they would need to put their body under. There's no too young. It's just managing the needs and the demands of that person, and that goes from the youngest of riders and athletes all the way up. So if you had a gymnast, for example, and gymnasts notoriously start training when they are unbelievably young, all of those aspects, doing handstands, rolls, are different movement patterns, and often their training loads are very hard to manage because they are put under such high pressure very early on. And it's getting a lot better with some of Beth Tweddle's schools that she's starting up in that aspect, in that sport. And I think knowledge and understanding is growing with regards to youth development. But certainly that training load, as long as it's managed and as long as the specific goals for each athlete are managed, then there is no too young. It will just be setting the right boundaries on each person.
Okay. So talking about goals and staying motivated, what are the best ways to stay motivated with your training during lockdown?
The two ways I generally, I suppose, kind of force on my clients and my athletes a little bit is to set a couple of specific goals. So there'll be a long-term goal, which is what they'd want to reach maybe in 6 months down the line. Now, certainly in lockdown, 6 months seems like a very long way away. So trying to split that down into manageable sections, and then having two types of goals for each one. One of them being a process goal. So how many times they're going to train this week, or something like, are they going to start eating a little bit more protein? So on the nutrition side, or stop eating quite as many packs of crisps or chocolates and maybe have an additional piece of fruit, something like that. And then an outcome goal that they can achieve. So within 2 weeks, you should be able to perform a plank for 10 additional seconds from whatever you started off on. So it's a small manageable goal, but it gives you that little bit of motivation each time.
Yeah,
and then regular check-ins.
Yeah. No, sorry, I interrupted you there.
That's all right.
I was going to say, I like the idea of it being kind of numerical. Some people work really well off that.
Yeah, it's having that specific edge to it that makes the difference, rather than I think the most common goal I get told about is I want to improve my core, or I want to lose weight. Whereas if they can go, I'd like to lose 1 kilogram in the next 2 weeks, gives you that really specific target to hit and work towards.
Yeah, definitely. And you can kind of get lost in your long-term goals if there's not those short, manageable ones in place.
Massively, yeah.
Okay, so the final question is, what would be your top tips or advice on getting back to being competition ready for people who won't have been riding much over the last few months?
The first thing will be to manage expectations with regards to what they're able to do. It's really common, especially for athletes that are even slightly competitive, is they'll come back from a period of time off, whether that be a relaxation time, a forced time like lockdown, it could be an injury, and they will try and jump back on as where they left off, rather than managing their expectations and going, right, well, I know I need to take it back a little bit. So rather than my goal being where I started from, the day I go back to full training, set that a few weeks or months down the line. So having, a little goal, but pushing it back further. So making sure it's not, as soon as I get back to training, I'm going to be able to do this. I'm going to be able to do as many lunges as I could previously. I'm going to be able to ride for as long as possible. I'm going to go from riding my horse 3 times a week to riding 5 horses a day, 6 days a week, is kind of that expectation that is going to cause more harm than good. So there's a lot of issues in terms of jumping back into it too quickly and injuring yourself very, very quickly from managing that load. The other thing is to gradually build up some of the off-horse training as well. So the off-horse training, when your horse is not available, it is building up your resilience, your tolerance to exercise, your ability to move still without having the horse. But I mean, it's also important, if you are riding a little bit as well, that you are still training, because you are very unlikely to kind of flog your horse 6 days a week. So if you are going to have a harder riding session once a week, build in some harder off-horse training for yourself 1 or 2 days a week. So really small quantities, small volumes to start with, to build up that resilience gradually, rather than trying to hit the ground running and go straight at it, is probably the biggest bit of advice. Manage it, plan it, being the best way of doing that. Plan what you're going to do over the next week or two, and then hopefully you'll be able to manage whatever sessions might come your way in the future and down the line.
Yeah, I can imagine people just going out thinking that it's going to be exactly the same jumping on as it was before, and it's definitely not, especially if you haven't been doing anything at home to maintain. And if you have a strong horse, like we were saying before, and your core strength is maybe not as good as it was, that could really have a big impact.
Yeah, it could be that kind of initial, just that one incident where it pulls you out of position, and you're unable to control your body in the same way you were. Or it could just be that repetitive nature of riding. It could be that repetitive impact, and just having too much of that too quickly could just start to break you down a little bit. So if you wanted any more information about training or testing, profiling, anything like that, you can contact me on phoenixtraining@live.co.uk for any more information or needs.